Is it possible to create common ground on the issue of transgender identities? I think that it is. The key to doing so is to understand the distinction between sex and gender. Many people make this distinction but don't always honor it. Sex is a biological category. It refers to chromosomes, internal male or female genitalia, and primarily the capacity to create either sperm or ovum. It's a biological process. In contrast, gender is a socio-psychological process. It refers to a person's deep experience. It refers to identity, expression. It is a psychological something. It's a categorization of one's own experience. Gender and sex are different. They're not independent, but they are different. And it's the capacity to keep them separate that's going to allow us to see how it is that we can possibly bridge divides. So, what happens is that people on the left or the right, the politically conservative or politically progressive, tend to privilege one of these categories over the other. People on the right who are conservative often will acknowledge the existence of sex. Maybe they'll acknowledge the existence of gender. If they do, they will believe that sex as a category trumps gender if it exists at all. So a person is born with a certain sexual characteristics that determines what they are. You are either male or female or intersex, if you will. And then people who at the extreme, conservatives who look at people who may claim a gender identity that's different from sex, they may see those people as somehow abnormal, mentally ill, or dysfunctional in some way. Now, on the other side, you have the progressive left. And what happens there, I think, is that people on the left are more willing, I think, to acknowledge the difference between sex and gender. However, they do the opposite. They make the opposite assumption that gender trumps sex, regardless of what it is that your sexual identity is, your biological sexual identity is. It's the self-categorization that matters. Now, this comes from a long-standing American belief in self-determination, the idea that we are in charge of our own identities. We can identify our own identities and that sort of thing. Now, psychologically, that is incorrect, I believe. I don't believe that we psychologically or self-identify our own identities, but that's a situation or a discussion for another time. But the problem here is that when people on the left, I suggest, say that gender trumps biology, what they're saying is I get to self-identify my gender, and that self-identification eliminates or is more important than any biological distinctions that are there. And so that the people on the left can be accused of denying biology. This is a problem as well. How do you fix this? It seems to me that the answer is that we acknowledge that there is not one identity, but two identities. There is a biological identity and a psychological or a socio-psychological identity. The biological identity is sex. Biological identity identifies what we are as biological beings, as either male or female, or the varieties of intersex. Gender identity is a socio-psychological identity, and it identifies how it is that we classify or categorize ourselves. The point in preserving the distinction between these two types of identities, a biological identity and a socio-psychological identity, is to say that neither one of them trumps the other. Instead, there are contexts and spheres of social life in which one is more important or one is more important than the other, and vice versa. There are spheres of social life where one matters and the other doesn't matter as much. In the medical world, when we're talking about biology or medicine, sexual biological identity matters. It would be foolish of us if someone were to go into surgery or the like not to identify their sex because the bodies differ as a result of sex and they have to be treated differently. However, if I go to a party, if I am going to a job situation where sexual biology doesn't matter, Doesn't matter. Now I can identify myself any way I want to identify myself. But the point of the matter is that social identity is a social identity. It's something that's taking place in social life rather than in the world of biology. There are going to be clear cases where social identity matters and clear cases where biological identity matters. And then there's going to be the huge range of things in between. Those are the ones that matter. So, for example, clearest example is trans women in women's sports. Male transitioned into women, if you will, who are playing in women's sports. Here, what we have here is a clash of identities. A clash. What we have is a person with male chromosomes, a male anatomy, playing in a sport that is defined by female biology. Now, this is important because after puberty, if a trans woman engages in hormone replacement, that hormone replacement will reduce that person's strength, but that will not eliminate the physical differences that have already accrued up until that point. The simple fact of the matter is that male that trans women and women biologically are not the same. Now, this becomes a very difficult issue. You have a clash. You have a clash here that must be dealt with. Can it be dealt with? Yes. Can we debate and discuss this issue? Yes. But what we can't do, I suggest, is to suggest that there is a biological identity that trumps the gender identity, or a gender identity that trumps the biological identity in all different contexts. In all contexts, that cannot happen. We have to be able to identify these two types of identities and where they matter. We can respect both.